All right, you are the world's greatest GM. You prepare for your game nights weeks in advance. Your players are going to be so stoked. You have legendary monsters, incredible twists and challenges, dungeons galore, NPCs that you have so fleshed out. You know who they were in love with in the third grade. Then game night comes, your adventure goes just as planned. Half of your players at the end of the game are asleep. The other half say this was the best game they've ever experienced in their lives. Everybody's had it happen. It doesn't matter how long you've been a GM, inevitably things do not go exactly as planned, but some of what we're going to talk about today can help you understand why. Because you may need to figure out whether or not your players are role players or role players, as in they like to roll dice all night long, and that's pretty much it. Because knowing that can help you figure out how to plan your adventures. And so in this episode of GM Tips, we're going to be talking about how you can build a 3-act adventure to help every single one of your players have a great time. This is GM Tips, sponsored by Scabbard, and I'm Ravensmaw. Thanks for joining us. You step quietly into the dark night. The smell of death surrounds you. You hear the creaking of birds, and you knock upon the Duke's door. He answers. And what do you say? So I just leveled up and, I'd really like to try out this new skill, so can we kill some kobolds? That is inevitably what we face as game masters. We have players who come from all across the board in the things that they really enjoy in your games. And, our job as game masters is to create an adventure and a game night, which takes up, 4 or 5 hours sometimes. We want it to be fun. I mean, people are voluntarily giving their time to this game, and we're the game masters, so we want it to be cool and memorable. And sometimes it's a challenge to make everybody happy. So, in this week's episode of GM Tips, we're going to talk about how to build this 3-act adventure. So, first you need to understand the 2 different kinds of players. Now, there's lots of different kinds of players, but we're going to talk about 2 different kinds of players. First of all, you have players that like to role play. They like to, create their characters and have interactive conversations to show how incredibly clever they are and how they interact with your NPCs. It is part of the game for them. Getting into the game to actually role play in a role-playing game is what they really dig. And then you've got other players. You've got players like these, role players. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with either one of them. Role players who really enjoy the randomness of combat, being able to roll the dice and it turns out to be a nat 20 and everything goes perfectly as planned. And then players who really enjoy, interacting with you as the game master and interacting with the other players as well. They're both equally important in running a great adventure. However, you need to understand that in order for a game to go well, you've got to think about the needs of both of these groups of people. So, for example, if you had a completely dungeon-based game and all you do is go around, we've got kobolds and orcs and dragons and you're killing them left and right. We've got skill challenges and pretty much the whole game is roll for this and roll for that. And you guys know, combat takes forever. It can. There's tips and tricks to make combat go as quickly as possible, but inevitably it can take a long time. And so you have your role-playing characters, the ones who like to play their part, sometimes lose interest in when it's an hour of roll initiative and roll a skill or roll for damage. On the other hand, you also have players who really don't get interested in the NPCs all that much. They just are not interested in getting to know why the Duke is doing what he's doing and how he was wronged at the age of 5 by the evil wizard that you're going up against. It doesn't mean that they have equally are as if their needs are invalid or somehow unequal. They're equal. So here's how to create a game, an adventure that may last one night, it may last a couple of nights, but it really finds ways to engage both of these types of players. So think of it like this. In a good story, a novel or a short story, or a play, you might have 3 acts. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And they tend to fall into similar categories. Act 1 has a lot of setup. Act 1 does a lot of introductions of characters and places and gives you an idea of what the hook for the story is going to be. Act 2, now things get more complicated. There's going to be challenges, sacrifice, struggles, and maybe even, some real conflict that goes on in Act 2. But by the time you get to Act 3, you are now at the final confrontation. You are facing the Tyrannosaur. You are facing down the big bad evil guy or the big bad good guy and having to use all of your wits and all of your skills and all of your swords and all of your arrows just to get through the combat, right? But if you think of it like that, then you want to think of your adventures beginning with a lot of role-playing, and ending with a lot more role-playing, as in rolling dice and conflict and skills challenges. So this is how I would suggest you think through the building of your next adventure. Now, this is assuming you're doing a homebrew, but you could also think through this through a sandbox campaign or a pre-written campaign. Right now, our group is going through Curse of Strahd. It doesn't matter. You can still think of your nights in the same way, that you're trying to build this story with an incredible crescendo at the end, even if it's a sandbox campaign, to think about how things are going to end up and how the evening is going to begin and what's going to happen in the middle. So Act 1, you should think about mostly role-playing. So set up your NPCs. Think of your plot hooks. What's really going to grab each of your players, all right? What might grab your role-playing players, the ones who like to roll dice, is the thought that there's going to be some really cool combat coming on later. So maybe introduce that possibility early on. Whet their appetite for the action. And the same thing goes for your role players, the folks who like to play their character. Help them to, see ahead that a part of playing their character is going to be this conflict later on. All right? And then Act 2, whenever you move into the next phase, now we're looking at a mix of role-play and role-playing, rolling dice and skills challenges. This might be a minion encounter, right? So an emissary of the big bad evil guy or big bad good guy or the main conflict. So you get a taste of what it's going to be like later. But that combat can also end in a role-playing kind of activity where you have to question the bad guy, or maybe you need to find out information about where the big bad evil guy is, or the artifact, or whatever you happen to be looking for in this episode of your grand campaign. All right? So, and also this is a good time, you could put in like a puzzle or a challenge or a sacrifice, something the players are going to have to leave behind or lose in order to get to Act 3. And then you've got Act 3. Mostly role-playing. This is going to be might be a big conflict, a significant skills challenge. Really allow your players to use their player character skills and abilities, their spells. I mean, wipe out their spell slots, hopefully, within this encounter. They should really feel like they tapped all of the different elements of their player. And it can take a little while. Sometimes whenever I'm playing, we'll get through Act 1 and Act 2 and build up to Act 3 in a next game, because I know the combat's going to take a little while, and so our games generally run about 2.5, 3 hours. So on the shorter side, and I save that big combat for later, and then I kind of invert the order, right? So I get to that big conflict at the beginning of the next game, and then I sort of move my way out of it, allowing the role-playing characters to move into the phase that they really enjoy by maybe bringing back the person who was kidnapped or whatever, right? So as you're thinking about your building of the next adventure, think through this structure. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Sometimes it's going to be challenging. Sometimes it's not going to work out just right. But by thinking about it in this way, you also pay attention to the needs of your individual players. And you, as the great GM, can begin to cast a spell on every single one of them, so that all of them fall in love with your game. They can't forget about how awesome it was last week, and they can't wait to get to the next game. So that's just one way of thinking through it. We'll have more GM tips as we go along. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you hit that like button down there and find out more about Scabbard, our sponsor. And have a great game night coming up this week. And role play, virtual or in person, it is the best thing we can be doing with our minds right now. This is Ravensmaw, out.